On the show today, we have guest Ari Gerzon-Kessler, who is a sought-after national speaker, trainer, and coach working with schools and districts committed to forging stronger school-family partnerships. He is the author of On the Same Team, Bringing Educators and Underrepresented Families Together, which won the gold medal from the Independent Publisher Book Award for Outstanding Education Book of 2024. Ari regularly presents at national and international conferences on families and educators together, teams, and other innovative family partnership best practices. Ari is a leading expert at the intersection of family engagement, inclusion, and belonging practices, SEL for adults, and school transformation. Get ready for an exciting episode.
I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-created curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Ari, welcome to the Time for Teachership podcast, or I should say welcome back to the Time for Teachership podcast. It's good to have you.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Lindsay. I always enjoy our conversations.
Absolutely. I am really excited for kind of the frame for today. We won't ask the same questions as before, so people should go back and listen to the other episode. But, so much has been happening in the world with us individually. And so I kind of want to frame the context for us today. What do you think is important for folks to know in the audience, in both in terms of like the hats we're speaking to today, but also kind of this idea of where we are as a nation and kind of as a educational kind of society or sphere of life here at this moment of recording in August 2025?
Yeah. Well, and I think most folks who've been following the news and feeling the impact of the shifting climate since just the last 6 months, since inauguration, we know that attacks on education funding, massive threats to kind of the safety and well-being of a lot of our immigrant students, that there's been so many dramatic shifts on the national landscape. And I know, working closely with 30 plus schools each month, a lot of families are afraid and educators don't know how to support them. And, the heart of my work are these teams that bring immigrant families and educators together. And there's this sense of, oh, well, we can't deepen relationships. They're afraid to just come to school. And it's been fascinating to see that actually, as we've built initial rapport over the last year or two, that we're often getting more families that are afraid to come to school actually coming out. And I think that's, in most communities, speaking to the need for connection, the need for true support from educators. So yeah, that's that piece combined with, of course, the attack on DEI and the sense that regardless of people's political beliefs around DEI, I think we all are on the same page of wanting to build cohesive school communities where everyone feels a sense of belonging. And that's really the heart of the work that I care about. So that piece, I hope, is common ground, that all best practices that foster better relationships and trust are beneficial across the board, regardless of anyone's, political affiliation. So yeah, so those are some just quick reflections on the national landscape and how it's impacting, I think, our day-to-day work. And then I know you and I have talked over the years about the intersection of like being closely in connection daily with educators and then being parents working working with the educators in our kids' schools. And I've had a couple of just really meaningful, powerful experiences now wearing that parent hat that's giving me insight on how to actually help other educators better support our families.
Yeah, and you had mentioned kind of the day one experience that you had with your child's school. Do you mind sharing that story with us
Yeah,
to kind
no,
of?
absolutely. Yeah. So something that one of my top practices I support schools with is increasing two-way communication, and this piece that families are feeling flooded with too much communication and or they're feeling like the communication's not through the right channels. And I'm working on a piece for Utopia right now on those two themes. And So what I got to experience powerfully as a parent was day one, April 10th, my daughter's 2.5 birthday. She was allowed to start school, and she was nervous, pretty introverted at the time. I brought her to her first day of school, and she was in tears, not uncommon. And I walked away feeling, of course, sad and anxious, really curious, like how her first day was going to go. And I jumped in my car, was driving to a meeting with all of our family community liaisons. And as I arrived at that meeting, I get a text from her teacher saying, "Hey, Selah is having, like a wonderful morning now. She was able to kind of pivot after a few minutes. I'll loop back with you again later in the day with an update." So to get this text on day one built this sense of trust, connection, deep gratitude that like the teacher in the middle of that morning was so thoughtful and aware that she reached out with a text instead of sending me an email 5 days later or whatever. Um, and as you know, and I shared that with the liaisons at moments later at the meeting and said, "Hey, we've been working for a couple years on trying to increase texting and reduce emails because that's what our parents have been telling us again and again. Here is kind of proof in the pudding of what it feels like as a parent. And I now trust my daughter's school, probably for years to come, simply from that really positive start. So I just think that speaks volumes to intentionality and being proactive and why practices like in the summer calling all new families to welcome them for 30 seconds makes such a huge difference.
Oh my gosh, thank you for telling that story. And in the spirit of Shane Zafir called it storyintation, I'll share a kind of a similar at my kid's first school when he was 3 months, he brought him to kind of like the, infant center or whatever, and didn't ask like my name, his name. It was just kind of a drop off and it felt horrifying. And
Mm.
like he was fine. It was a great school, all the things, but like just that lack of communication, that lack of
Yeah.
that contrasted with just around the same time, April of this past year, he switches to a new school, has the tears at drop off, is really nervous. And it was an email, but I actually preferred email, so it was perfect. And they sent me just like a picture of him playing with a toy, and it was like he's fine, like it was a phrase, it was short, sweet, but it was like 5 minutes after drop off or something, and it was like thank you because now I don't have to worry all day long. And it's just the power of like where my mind went. It's funny your mind went to like you were just going to something around family engagement. I was sitting there thinking, as an educator in a classroom, how great would it have been had I had the thought to be able to share directly with parents and family members to just say, hey, I know your kid came in having a tough day. And like, here's the great thing that they did today. Like, even as of a high school child, right? To be able to share that, I'm sure parents and family members would have totally appreciated that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you're sparking just two quick connections. One is positive outreach, which is the other in my top three practices, positive outreach at any level. And I remember in the pandemic, we established, like here are the 150 high school students at this particular school we want to re-engage. And we did, 20, 30 minutes a week of positive calls. And that is so incredibly impactful. Yeah. And then just, to your story of like the initial outreach, just that proactive piece can make such an initial difference.
Absolutely. And I think this kind of spins into our next thing about kind of the why. Why is it so important that family engagement is a priority amidst budget cuts, amidst all of the competing priorities that school districts have? And I know you know a lot of the research on this. So do you mind speaking to kind of the benefits of doing stuff like this?
Yeah, yeah. I think Lindsay, it's a conscious shift from seeing family engagement as an outcome and something we can kind of check boxes around to, what Dr. Karen Mapp and many others in our field have said it needs to be a strategy, not an outcome. And it's a strategy that drives all the outcomes we care about. The third practice of my three actually comes up naturally now, relationship-centered home visits. That's not only the research has proven it's great for academic learning and obviously for relationship building and trust, but when a few districts in California a year or two ago embraced that as one of their practices to reduce chronic absenteeism. It was remarkable. I mean, I read about this in the New York Times last year. They knocked their chronic absenteeism rates from 30% of their students down to 14 or 15%. So that's hundreds of students and families where those home visits made a pivotal difference. So I think that's one piece of the puzzle. The other part that really stands out to me is our paradigm around what family engagement is, that I think to this day in most schools, we still see it about events and did they attend? And the reality is, as you were just speaking to, like the day-to-day communication, the relationship building, trust is much more impactful, as well as things like the research shows that if we get parents talking about education with their kid at home and the value of learning, that does more than anything else to predict academic success, more than socioeconomic status, parents' education level, host of things. So that's one piece. And yeah, and I was sharing this with colleagues this week that, I worked with some teachers and principals in Boston last summer, and we brainstormed, what does family engagement look like at your school? And when I was on my flight home to Colorado, I looked at the list and it didn't surprise me, but it really was stark. More than 90% of what they put on their list of what is family engagement were events. So it's really seeing the value of how do we shift towards more relational communication practices, which I know we'll dive a little deeper in. And I would say on the event front, many of us can go to school events and not forge a stronger connection with the staff or with other families. So a lot of our Family and Educator Together teams at 31 schools now in Colorado are looking at how do we reinvent events like back to school night, parent-teacher conferences, to make them much more relationship building oriented, and mutual and human to human versus the traditional approach, that's just not working for families and is usually unsatisfying for educators when we create spaces to hear their experiences of these events.
Oh wow, that is my mind is exploding right now with all sorts of ideas. But that is so profound because I think about just, again, as a parent showing up to preschool activities, like there are some activities that I don't interact or engage with like another parent, a teacher, or another child that my child is friends with. And it's like, what was that? Versus, having like a text thread or like a Slack coaching space or something, or, whatever it is, some other means that's asynchronous. It might not be live, but it is, I often think about like, I want to be seen as a person, as a family member as well. Like I kind of want my child's teacher to be like, hey, what do you do? Or like, what's important to you? Or,
Yes.
these kinds of relational things, because I feel like without knowing them, how do you best like have a values alignment when you're teaching my child, right? How do you know that actually I kind of reject the gender binary and I don't want to raise my child in a way that's very gendered? And like, I have to actively write that in the forms when there's not a space for them because that's not a question that someone asks, right? Or there's no opening to have those kind of conversations. And so that relational versus like attendance at an event. I mean, we know with students at school, you can attend school and not get very much out of it, right? Like,
Yes.
where's the relationship? Where's the engagement that's deep and thoughtful? I love that shift. That's brilliant.
Well,
And
and I appreciate you sharing about wanting to be known and seen, because my older brother visited last week. I hadn't seen him in 3 years, and he was in Canada the last 7 years. And we briefly talked about family engagement. And what he said, affirms what you were sharing, and was really helpful for me, because I'm always learning in this field. Like he said to me, yeah, I went to an event at my kid's school, and I wanted to get to know other families. I wanted them to ask about like my hobbies, my strengths. I wanted to be able to share, like, I coach tennis. I'd love to help the school. But instead, the educators really, just as is commonplace at so many schools, followed the traditional mode of, we're going to show we're experts and share a ton of information with you and not create the space. And when I commented on that, he said, I don't even think it was in their mindset that they could create a more collaborative, humanistic space for sharing. And I also get, as a former principal, there is this element of, ooh, I'm going to have to release some control, um, and and that's tricky. Yet I also know that if we're intentional and creating nice structured spaces to hear more voices, that can also be fruitful and not, get off the rails.
Hi, this is Leah popping in to share the free resource for this episode. It's a playbook for practical family engagement strategies, and you can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lyndsaylyons.com/blog/235. Now back to the show.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. I would love to know from all the work you've done, like what are those ways that we do create those structured spaces for more relational dynamics and engagement with families and educators? What action steps do you have for us?
Yeah, yeah. Well, in terms of the in-person gatherings, I mean, I think one huge learning has been the value of creating a space for families and educators to come together to learn from each other and build connections outside of these more typical events, truly where they're meeting as equals. So that's been the essence of these family and educator together teams that, I wrote about in depth in my book On the Same Team. And they have really illuminated over hundreds of gatherings what makes a difference for families. So instead of them coming into the meeting and listening to someone talk to them or at them, for 10, 20 minutes, this is so commonplace. We start with a quick team building activity that, some might call an icebreaker, but gets everyone laughing. Often is a paired activity that goes across language, cultural, other boundaries and barriers. And then we've learned again over the years to apply SEL best practices to parent gatherings where we do an introduction circle where everyone shares their name, their child's name, and something about their life. And that builds a sense of, okay, we're all humans here and have both rich differences and similarities. And it also creates much more psychological safety when everyone's brought their voice in briefly, when we're then inviting families in to share their input, they feel much more comfortable. And since most of the families I work with have been marginalized in our school communities, it's just so important for us to be very thoughtful in the initial, say, 20, 30 minutes of gatherings. And the last thing I would say that's really the essence of doing connection better is privileging relationship building, not going to content right away in initial meetings, and then making sure that families' voices comprise as much or more of these gatherings than educators' voices, which really flips the traditional paradigm. So yeah, I would say those have been some of the core piece. And a final one is, parents will lose trust in us if we don't show follow through. So like creating some sense of continuity and getting concrete around what are we changing as a result of what we learned from hearing everyone's perspective tonight. Because one of my failures as a leader of this work in the early, I'd say 3 years, was that we built great relationships and trust, and that was a win in itself. But if we walked down the hallway to a random teacher's classroom and said, "Hey, it's April now. How are you doing family engagement different?" If they had not been a part of those gatherings, there weren't systemic changes. So I'm really keenly aware of like what can we easily and efficiently change at any given school that will have multiple benefits for ideally all members of the community.
Oh, I love that. I think that is something I'm trying to work on as well, is like how can we both as a reflective opportunity but also as a measurement opportunity just like reflect on and kind of codify like this is the change and like report that back and have that accountability with students and with families. I think it's so important. So I love that you're thinking about that. I also am thinking too about these like two hats, right, of the family members and the educators. Is there anything that you have found to be particularly successful in terms of like engaging family members who might have like you talk a lot and write a lot about like linguistically affirmative spaces and affirming spaces and having like translation and things like that. I'm wondering also about like time constraints and people who are like, oh, I don't know if I have the time to like come in and be part of that. I know you've talked about like a childcare as like actually part of the whole setup and kind of infrastructure. I'm just thinking about some of the other constraints that educators might have in their minds or families might have in their minds of like, oh, I would love to be part of this. And I'm thinking about this challenge and wanting to know how do I overcome it, or if there's like an alternative means of relationship building that might not be synchronous? I don't know. I'm thinking about a lot of questions at once. Feel free to
Yeah.
engage with any.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, one thought is that we're shifting our perspective as educators to appreciate more, the linguistic capital and other capital that we often assume like, oh, that family speaks Spanish or Hmong. They're going to have a hard time connecting with us. Instead, shifting to like they have a bilingual, multilingual child. How can we connect with them and build a bridge to them? Which means concrete things like that they get a positive call too, because I, as an educator, tap the translation line to make sure that we're building that relationship. In terms of time constraints, I'm glad you brought that up because if we're moving away from an event focus, and the reality is I'm busy in my two jobs as an educator right now. I can't go to, this Saturday's event at my daughter's school, which is like the welcome back community service thing, because I'm happening to take her to like an art class, which is not, I'm not normally that kind of like ambitious parent on the weekends. It's usually about rest and hang out at home. But that transparency aside, like my point is the the small back and forth texts, powerful. One line of like you were saying. You also mentioned earlier the photograph. When I was with moms at one FET team gathering a couple of years ago, and we said, what would be most helpful? 3 out of 3 moms in that group shared stories of, yeah, when the teacher just sent me a photo with a couple words, that meant the world. And I don't need all these long emails necessarily about curriculum. So that's one example. And then I'm also thinking about other relationship building strategies that, again, referencing my recent experience as a parent. My child's teacher emailed me for the first time, since last school year ended, and just asked 2 questions, like, what are you most excited about for this coming school year? And what are you curious or concerned about? And I sat out, at night for 20 minutes after my daughter was asleep, and it sparked deep, deep reflection. I was able to share with her, hey, I'm an educator too. You might be interested in connecting. And so that was great that she didn't just inform me, she posed questions. And so between that, home visits, which again also can be virtual. I mean, they're not the same, but I've seen the power of identifying 5 families in your class that didn't come to back to school night and laying out, a schedule of, okay, over the next 2 weeks, here's some blocks where I'm going to try to connect for 15 to 20 minutes to do a virtual visit with families. I think those are some of the ways to ensure we're building trust with all of our families.
I love that. I think I'm one of my takeaways from this conversation already. That's such a simple shift is like instead of talk, just invite like ask a question and invite a response. Like what a small shift, but what a powerful one. This seems like a good starter. I was gonna ask you, that's my one thing. What is your one thing that like if someone is like, this feels really big, this feels like it's a big thing, it's a
Yeah.
long process to build like relational trust and all of the pieces, but you can start the momentum, right? You can start with something. What would be that one thing for you that you would recommend to someone to just kind of start
Yeah.
tomorrow?
Yeah, no, I love that question. And the timing is perfect because, we're talking in mid-August as school year kicks off in many states. I always say in August, the easiest and best thing you can do is just ask families, how would you like me to communicate with you? And I've seen teachers leverage that information to realize, okay, half of the parents want this info in an email, the other half want it in a text. It also just starts sharing power with the family where they can say, like, I'd love to be able to connect with you for 5 minutes once a month after school when you're saying goodbye to, your students or shortly after. So I think that would be the one easy question to ask families. And ideally doing an inventory. I talk about this when I do trainings on parent teacher conferences. The the word that comes to me is like, and I did it myself, the arrogance of us as educators to 5, 6 weeks into a school year to even say phrases like, well, let me tell you about your child's strengths. And it's like, okay, I've had my daughter or son at home for 9 years, and you're telling me about their strengths. So, those inventories that make them easy on, families, maybe ask 5 questions. Like, what are you most proud of your child about? What are your greatest hopes for their school year? Tell me a little about what they enjoy doing outside of school. Those can open up doors to just be a better teacher and support to that child. And so that, I guess that would be a parallel. What's one easy thing you can do?
I love those. I love that they're specific as well, right here. If you're really like, I've never asked families questions before, like, there you go. There's a bunch. You can just ask those now. I love that. And I also am thinking those are kind of some quick things that you can do for some longer things. I know you do coaching, you support school districts, you do kind of one-on-one stuff. What are some of the kind of range of things as an educator is listening, or a family member who wants to advocate on behalf of maybe their child's school or school district? Like, what are some of the ways that you or folks like you are kind of like supporting schools to do stuff like this? What are the options available for them?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would say we've touched on a number of these great practices, right? That can be woven in. A principal can give teachers, and teachers can advocate for this, or parents can. 15 minutes once a month, the staff makes positive calls, or they send text updates to kids who are struggling academically in a class. And I've seen at some of our middle schools, that's a couple hundred families that get a call that afternoon. So there's all these practices that I, coach and embed into trainings around. I know we're overwhelmed as a profession. How can we work smarter, not harder, and weave them in so it's not add-ons for educators to do, in the evening and after school? The other major piece that, I truly think is the game changer is starting teams and creating these somewhat unique spaces. Because what I found, Lindsay, is that schools that do family engagement kind of a la carte, or don't have a built-in space to discuss family engagement and to listen to families, just stay stuck in a traditional family involvement approach. And these teams just literally creating 90 minutes once a month to come together, break bread, have dinner together, ask great questions, listen, engage in team building activities is utterly transformative. And I see these schools make 5 years worth of progress in 6 months, compared to neighboring schools that don't have teams and don't create these spaces. So a lot of my coaching work is, how do you launch a team? And my book is a step-by-step guide, because after 5, 6 years at 15 schools, I was like, wow, we have kind of a special sauce here. This is really needed in pretty much every school community, to have this space. So I think that would be, the heart of what I would encourage schools to really think deeply about. And if they have some sort of existing team, getting more clear on its purpose. And I'm doing some work this fall with some schools where they have a family engagement team, but they're doing so much around theories and frameworks and data, and not doing the story-centered approach you were talking about at the beginning of our conversation.
Oh, that's a really good thing to highlight. Just that difference, right? And like, oh, we're just looking at data, we're just looking at, right? Versus we're listening to stories, we're inviting conversation. Like, it is
Yeah.
very stark that you put it that way, and that I think is going to resonate with a lot of people. So thank you for that frame. I think too, this is a fun question that I asked you last time. I'm curious now. Also, like, what is something that you have been learning about lately, either something related to our conversation or something completely not related to our conversation? Take it wherever you want.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm reading a book that my Zen teacher and one of our, my peers, just published, and just read last night about the shadow and how much we can learn, and this new concept of like the golden shadow, which I didn't know about, which is like when you look at other people and deeply admire something about them, and then you don't necessarily see that capacity and that gift in yourself enough. And so there's the projection side of like, oh, that person seems really like overly ambitious. And then turning towards like, well, where do I actually have that ambitious part in myself as I judge them for their overly ambitious approach or style? So yeah, I would say, that is resonating from last night's reading. And then I continue to learn from other walks of life, about family engagement. And so that's been really fascinating the last year or two, to really take this lens of wherever I travel, wherever I go, can I look for examples of big systems creating more of this authentic care approach versus the more transactional institutional way of doing things.
That's such a good lens for just everyone, whatever your thing is, whatever. Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Okay. I'm glad I asked that question again. Where can listeners learn more about you, connect with you? I know you have a new website, which we will of course link to, and we'll of course link to the book as well in the show notes and blog posts for this episode. Any other place that you would recommend people reaching out, or anything else you wanna comment on before the close of the episode?
Yeah, in terms of reaching out, yeah, I spent much of this summer creating a website that just was released last week, sameteamconsulting.org. I'm really excited about that. Easy to find on LinkedIn. People can email me directly at arigerzon@gmail.com. And I'd say those are the easiest pathways. And then, my book On the Same Team is right now, it's 47% off on Amazon. So it's a steal right now. It can be found at the publisher Solution Trees site as well. Yeah, and I think I would just close, Lindsay. I was mentioning to you that like there's been some powerful experiences lately. I'll just share briefly a story I had that was one of those, oh, we could bring this back into schools and make it an easy thing we do in terms of how we approach interactions with more intentionality. I got on a flight a few months ago to Sacramento, and usually we don't see the pilot, right? They don't come out. And pilot came out and said, "Hi, welcome. I want to thank you for putting food on my family's table for 27 years. I was in the Air Force. I've now been a pilot for 27 years. I have 10 kids. I think they're all mine." So bringing humor, right? Humor and connection. And then he took it further and he said, "Here's my team, and we count on each other. You all are part of our team as well." And then, I just was moved, and I thought about, wow, imagine if the front office person at a school, the principal in their welcome, the teacher in their welcome, made that sort of relational, we're all one community. It took them all of 3 minutes to do intentionality and purpose. And the final part of the story, is 10 minutes later, we had some insane turbulence out of Denver. And I have had a couple rough flights over the years, and I started to get anxious. And then I just paused and I was like, wait, 27 years plus the Air Force? He's got this. And that totally settled my nervous system. And I had high trust. And I think we can think of all the families in our nation's schools that don't come in with trust, or have had that trust broken, and what those kinds of couple minutes can really do to shift the level of trust. So yeah, I think that's the one story I felt moved to share with you today.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That's a beautiful story. And I am just reminded, there's been like a thread of airplane related stories that I've heard lately. I'm just reminded how like airplane stories, if you have them, there are many parallels to education in life.
Absolutely.
Ari, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming back on.
A delight, Lindsay. Thanks so much for having me.
If you're looking for support to help you talk to your child about history, current events, or other high emotion topics, we've got you. Families are now welcome to join EduBoost. Here's how it works. Your kid brings up a topic and you're not sure what to say next, or something happens in the world or in your kid's life and you want to talk to your kid about it, but you're unsure how to bring it up. Immediately, you send us a message on Slack telling us what's going on via text or audio message. Slack can be used on your phone as well as your computer, so you can totally message us from the grocery store checkout line or at 2 a.m. when your question's literally keeping you awake at night. You get a personalized response and any relevant resources within 24 hours from me or my awesome colleague, Cara Prenikoff. Visit lindsaybethlyons.com/families for more information on family coaching.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.